The house was supposed to be the beginning of something good. It became the beginning of something else entirely. My name is Nadia. I'm 22 years old. And 8 months ago, my girlfriend, Serene, and I moved into our first home together. A narrow terraced house on Aldwych Street in a quiet part of the city we'd both dreamed of living in since we were teenagers, sharing a cramped flat with 3 other people. We had a gray tabby cat named Fig, who immediately claimed the windowsill above the kitchen sink. We had secondhand furniture that didn't match and didn't matter. We had each other. The house to our left was occupied by an older couple who waved when we moved boxes in. The house to our right was a problem we didn't immediately recognize as one. It had been mid-renovation when the owner walked away and disappeared. No one seemed to know which. The scaffolding was still up on one side. The garden fence had been removed to install a new one that never arrived, leaving our back garden and the abandoned property's garden joined in a single open space with no boundary between them. Behind that abandoned house was another property, separated by a waist-height temporary board fence that looked like it had been kicked down and restacked several times. 3 men lived in that back property. We knew this because we occasionally saw them, young, 20-something, moving through the abandoned garden like they owned it, using it as a shortcut to reach the front street. We assumed they had some arrangement with the absent owner. We didn't ask. We were new. We didn't want to start things wrong. Our first evening in the back garden was a warm Thursday in April. Serene had lit a candle on the patio table. Fig sat on the wall watching moths. I had a glass of wine and my feet up on a second chair, and for about 40 minutes I felt something I hadn't felt in years, settled. Then Serene said quietly, "Don't react." But that man has been staring at us for a while. I looked up slowly. Second floor window of the property behind the abandoned house. A man standing in an unlit room, arms at his sides, face expressionless. Not peering, not curious, just watching. The darkness of the room behind him made his face look pale and cut out, like a mask propped against the glass. We went inside after 30 minutes. Not because we were certain something was wrong, just because the feeling wouldn't leave. The first time they came into our garden, it was a Sunday night at 10:40 p.m. We heard the board fence scrape before we saw them. I was already standing when 3 figures stepped through the gap. 2 of them I half recognized from the back property, and one I didn't know at all. The unfamiliar one was the youngest, maybe late 20s, carrying a large duffel bag that clinked when he moved. "You all right?" I said, not warmly. I wanted them to understand I wasn't afraid to speak. The youngest one smiled. He opened the bag and held out a bulk pack of cleaning tablets still in shop packaging. The security tag had been snapped off. "Want some of these?" "No, thank you," I said. He shrugged. They left. The whole thing lasted under 3 minutes, and nothing technically happened. But I lay awake until 3 a.m., replaying the way they'd stepped through our fence without hesitation. No knock, no announcement, just entry, like the space between their lives and ours was a door they'd already decided didn't need opening. It happened again 4 days later, then again after that. Sometimes they just stood in the abandoned garden and watched our windows. Sometimes one would come alone, stand near our back door, and leave when he saw a light come on. Saren started closing the curtains before dark. Then one afternoon while I was cleaning, I looked out the front window and saw 2 police officers walk around the side of our house, enter the abandoned garden through the broken fence, look around, and leave without knocking on our door. I stood at the window for a long time after they drove away. 3 days later, they came back and knocked properly. The men from the back property had been evicted for antisocial behavior, multiple complaints, not just from us. The house was vacant. We should notice any further activity and call it in. I felt the specific relief of a threat being officially removed. I should have paid more attention to the word officially. 6 days after the eviction notice, I was in the bath when I heard Serene shout my name in a voice I hadn't heard from her before. Flat, controlled, the voice people use when they're keeping themselves very still. She was in the spare bedroom with her phone raised, filming something in the garden below. I came up behind her and looked. A man I had never seen before. Not one of the 3. Someone new was standing in the abandoned garden, pointing up at our bedroom window. Not our current window. The window of the room we actually slept in. He knew which one. When he saw Saren filming, he ran, full sprint toward our house. He grabbed our back door handle as he passed. Locked. It was locked. It held. And then he ran back into the abandoned garden, lifted the board fence, and began hammering on every ground floor window of the empty house with his fist. Methodical, working his way along the wall. That night I lay in the dark and thought about the door handle. The way his hand had closed around it and pulled, testing, checking, not panicking, checking, like he needed to know for next time. The whistling started 11 days later. 2:16 a.m., a particular kind of whistle, tuneless. Low, the kind used to get someone's attention from across a car park. I heard it through the wall and was awake before I understood I was awake. Saren's hand found my arm in the dark. Then tapping. 3 taps on the downstairs window, unhurried, like knocking on a friend's door. We checked the cameras. Nothing recorded. Either the angle was wrong or it had been deliberately avoided. The sound stopped after 20 minutes. We didn't sleep. The next morning we drove to my mother's and stayed the night. When we came back, the Ring doorbell had been placed on the floor beside the front. Step, neatly, the SD card was gone. Someone had come back while we were away. Someone had stood at our front door in the night, removed a camera, extracted its memory, and set it down gently. The gentleness was what undid me. Not rage, not destruction, careful, deliberate removal of evidence. The behavior of someone who had done this before. The police told us to keep doors and windows locked. The woman on the call said quietly that removal of recording equipment sometimes indicated planning. She said it like she was doing us a favor by saying it. Maybe she was. 3 weeks of relative quiet followed. Not safety, quiet. The distinction matters. Then at 11:50 p.m. on a Tuesday, Seren grabbed my arm and said, "Look at the live feed." The camera was inside by then, facing the front window. On the screen, a man standing in front of our garden gate, hooded, a black mask covering his nose and mouth. His arms spread wide, held out from his body at full extension. Horizontal like a crucifix, his head tilted back, looking up at our bedroom window. He stood like that for a long time. Then he lowered his arms and spoke. We couldn't hear him through the glass and the recording picked up nothing. Then he crossed the street and stood on the opposite pavement and looked at our house for 31 minutes. I timed it. The police said it wasn't illegal to stand on a public street. They said it in a tone that communicated they agreed this was unfortunate. But the law was the law. We were politely informed we had called a lot recently. We couldn't sleep for 4 days after that. The thing about being watched, really watched, over time, by someone who wants you to know it, is that eventually you start watching yourself. I began doing it without noticing, checking my reflection before I left a room, looking at my own hands while I made tea, wondering what they looked like from outside the window. Seren caught me standing at the kitchen sink one morning, staring at nothing, and asked if I was all right, and I couldn't answer her honestly because the honest answer was, I don't know what all right means anymore. The masked man came back. 2:52 a.m. camera notification. I woke Seren and said, check it. 2 of them this time, coming from the side of the house. Both masked, both hooded, handheld torches aimed at our ground floor windows. The man from 3 weeks ago, I recognized the jacket. The way he held his shoulders was carrying something. Long, dark, held along his thigh. A crowbar or something shaped like one. They didn't try the door this time. They shone the lights slowly across every window, one after another, like they were cataloging. Then they left. I sat on the bedroom floor with my back against the wall and thought about the word, planning that the woman on the phone had used. And I thought about the missing SD card. And I thought about the handle on our back door being tested in the afternoon light. And I understood for the first time that what was happening to us had a structure. It was not random frustration or territorial, posturing or bored men with nothing else to do. It was progression. Each visit had been slightly more than the last. First entry without permission, then standing and watching, then taking the camera, then the cross-armed man in the mask. Now 2 of them with torches and something heavy, each one a step further than the one before. Testing how far they could go before something stopped them. Nothing had stopped them. We applied for a non-harassment order. The process required documentation, which we had, reports, timestamps, camera footage, the doorbell photograph. A solicitor told us it was a strong case. She also told us it would take time. Time was the one thing I couldn't look at without flinching. Seren's sister invited us to stay with her in another part of the city while things processed. We went for a week. The first 2 nights I slept 12 hours straight, like my body was paying off a debt. On the 3rd night, I woke at 2:30 a.m. for no reason. I could identify and lay in the dark, listening to an unfamiliar street, and felt something close to peace. We came home on a Saturday morning. That same Saturday night, at 11:15 p.m., he was outside again, solo this time, standing across the street, pointing at our bedroom window, not at the house generally. at the specific window where our light was on, where he knew we'd be. He had waited. He had watched the house while we were gone, noted when the lights came back on and returned. Seren was the one who stayed calm. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera and said very quietly, "I'm going to get his face this time." She did. Full footage, clear frame, timestamp intact. We filed it that night. 2 weeks later, a detective constable called us and said they had identified him. Prior warnings for antisocial behavior at 2 other addresses. The non-harassment order was granted. If he came within 200 meters of Aldwych Street, he could be arrested. She said it carefully. The way people say things they want to be true, but know are complicated. A piece of paper is not a wall. A legal order assumes the person it names is paying attention to the law, and we had spent 4 months watching a man who communicated through his behavior that the law was something that happened to other people. He came back once more. 6 days after the order was granted, 2:09 a.m., camera notification. Serene checked it before I was fully awake. He was standing at the garden gate again. Same posture, head tilted up, but this time he stayed for only 4 minutes. Long enough to make sure the camera caught him. Long enough to make sure we knew he'd been there. Then he walked away. The police arrested him at his new address before noon the next day. I watched Seren's face when the detective called to tell us. She listened and said thank you and hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then she got up and opened the back door and stood in the garden in the October cold with fig winding around her ankles and looked up at the sky. I stood in the doorway watching her, and I noticed I was watching the fence line too, the back of the abandoned property, the gap where there should have been a boundary. I don't think I'll stop watching it for a long time. Maybe never completely. The brain learns patterns in the dark that it doesn't easily unlearn in the light. We ordered a new fence the following week. A proper one. Solid timber, 6 feet high, professionally installed. It went up on a Wednesday, and I stood in the garden after and looked at the solid wall of it and felt something, not safety exactly, but its closest available cousin. Something like the memory of settled. Fig claimed the top of it by Friday. We let him.